What if I told you that many of the fiercest fighters in World War II were not soldiers, but Filipino women? When we think of war, we often think of men as soldiers fighting in the battlefield, while women are back at home as caregivers, as nurses or mothers. And we actually see this in a lot of World War II movies in Hollywood and beyond. In fact, most of World War II history focuses on the soldiers and the generals fighting in the battlefield. But growing up in the Philippines, I've actually heard something different. I've heard stories of courage and resilience, of resistance and survival. Inspiring stories that, sadly, rarely makes it into our history textbooks. Inspiring stories that are actually much closer to home for many of us. For example, let's meet my grandparents. Meet my Lolo Marcos and Lola Feli, two Filipinos who lived through the war in very different ways. My Lolo was a medic, saving wounded soldiers on the battlefield. He once dreamed of becoming a lawyer, but as a medical student at UST when the war began, he found himself treating the injured, trying to keep as many people alive as possible. Meanwhile, my Lola Feli was up in the mountains, right alongside her older brothers and elder sisters, and they were all part of the guerrilla resistance in Pangasinan. She was only 13 when the war began, but she played a vital role. She took care of the messenger pigeons that carried communication and intelligence between guerrilla units. Both my Lolo and Lola defied the gender roles we often think of and typically associate with war. Their stories prove that war is not just fought with guns. It is fought with courage, resilience, and defying expectations. Both were fighting for survival and liberation, but in different ways. As a little boy, this little kid, this makulit na bata, very curious but very makulit na bata in Pampanga, listening to the stories of my grandparents, it made me realize something, that, mainstream history, these mainstream narratives, rarely talks about Filipino women in World War II. Women who fought, women who survived, women whose resistance paved way for our people's liberation. And it's time to change that, so let's learn more. Mabuhay, or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo. Welcome to my channel, it's me Kirby Araulio, your friendly Pinoy historian. In today's video, we'll meet some of the fiercest women in World War II, Filipino women who defied expectations and found ingenious ways to fight back. Because Filipino women were not just victims of war, they were fighters, spies, soldiers, and so many more. They were leaders. In fact, unknown to many, one Filipina spy turned fear into her greatest weapon, using her own disgusting illness to save hundreds of lives. Josefina Guerrero did not look like a spy, but when she was diagnosed with Hansen's disease or leprosy, everything changed. People feared touching her, including Japanese soldiers, and she cleverly used that fear to slip through enemy lines. She smuggled intelligence, battle plans, enemy positions, and crucial information right past Japanese checkpoints. Soldiers wouldn't dare search her, and thus letting top-secret documents pass through unnoticed. And her most dangerous mission was delivering maps of Japanese fortifications in Manila to the US military, intel that helped shape Allied bombing campaigns. Josefina never carried a gun or led troops, but her unwavering courage saved countless lives. In fact, the US Army honored her for her heroism. Josefina was not the only Filipina risking everything for intelligence. In fact, one of them worked directly with the US Army, proving that war was not just fought with bullets. Magdalena was a school teacher before the war, but after being captured by the Japanese, she made a bold decision to fight back. And once released, Magdalena became a key intelligence agent, smuggling radio parts, coded messages, and explosives across Japanese-controlled areas. And her work kept guerrilla forces connected to the US Army. Without Magdalena, coordinated efforts against the Japanese would have fallen apart. For Magdalena's bravery, she became one of the very few Filipinas ever awarded with the US Silver Star, one of the highest American military honors. Magdalena fought with intelligence and strategy, but not all wars are fought with weapons. Some battles are fought with food, and one Filipina turned her kitchen into a war zone to save thousands of lives. When you think of war, you often picture soldiers in a battlefield. But do you ever think about food? Because our next hero did. Maria Ilagan Orosa was not really a soldier or a spy. She was a scientist, a food technologist who believed nutrition could save lives, a Filipina scientist who dreamed of a Philippines that is self-sufficient. And her most famous invention is none other than the banana ketchup. But unknown to many, her most important creations were actually soyalak and darak, nutrient-dense food that fought malnutrition. During the war, Maria risked everything to smuggle food into Japanese prison camps, keeping countless Filipino and American prisoners of war alive. Sadly, she never got to see the full impact of her work. Maria died in the Battle of Manila in 1945, but her legacy lives on. Banana ketchup is still a global Filipino staple, and her wartime inventions saved thousands of lives. Maria Ilagan Orosa was nothing short of incredible. She turned science into a weapon of survival, saving countless lives, not with bullets but with food. And I've actually covered her story in more detail in a few of my past videos. So if you want to learn more about her incredible work and impact, make sure to check them out after this video. Maria Ilagan Orosa was not the only Filipina who used all her skills to fight against the Japanese. Some fought with intelligence, some like Maria used science, while many others fought back with guns. Most people think that war is only fought by men, but in the Philippines, Filipino women picked up rifles, led ambushes, and commanded troops in battles. In fact, for one Filipina, her classroom became a training ground for war. Before the war, Nieves Fernandez was a strict school teacher in Leyte. When the Japanese invaded, her students and neighbors faced forced labor, executions, and abuse. Nieves refused to stand by, and so she became a fighter. Nieves trained villagers to fight, arming them with knives, rifles, and even homemade explosives. Her strategy was jungle traps, ambushes, and direct assaults on Japanese patrols. One soldier underestimated Nieves, and that was a big mistake. She fought him hand to hand, killed him, and took his rifle, then used it against his fellow troops. By the time the war ended, it was said that Nieves commanded over 100 fighters, leading deadly raids against the Japanese. And when peace returned after the war, she went back to teaching. Her legacy was not just about the battles, it was about resilience, proving that a person with enough courage could change history. While Nieves Fernandez was training villagers to fight back, another Filipina was commanding full-on battalion, and she did this in full uniform with lipstick on. Imagine stepping into the battlefield with full military uniform, boots polished, rifle in hand, and wearing bright red lipstick. That was Remedios Gomez Paraiso, better known as Kumander Liwayway, one of the most legendary guerrilla commanders of World War II. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a leader. She commanded over 100 troops in battle and led strategic ambushes against Japanese forces. Remedios was from a politically active Kapampangan family before the war, but when the Japanese executed her father for refusing to cooperate, Remedios chose to fight. She joined the Hukbalahap resistance, or the Hukbong Bayan laban sa mga Hapon, and proved herself a brilliant strategist. And the red lipstick? That was her symbol of defiance. She believed that even in war, she wouldn't let the enemy strip her of her identity. She was a Filipina, a warrior, and a commander, and she refused to be anything less. Indeed, her leadership inspired more Filipinas to join the fight for liberation, breaking gender barriers in guerrilla warfare. Commander Liwayway was not alone. In fact, many Filipino women took up arms. Unknown to many, some of the most strategic and brutal offensive against the Japanese were led by women, Filipino women who outgunned and outsmarted the enemies on the battlefields. Unknown to many, Pampanga was not just another occupied province during World War II. It was a key battleground. The Japanese relied on supply routes running through Kapampangan territories. Cutting them off meant weakening the Japanese across Luzon. And that is exactly what the Kapampangan women did. If you were a guerrilla fighter in Pampanga during World War II, chances are that your commander was actually not a man, but a Filipina. So let's meet some of the fiercest. Felipa Culala, aka Kumander Dayang-Dayang, was one of the most fearless. She was not from a military family. Felipa was a peasant turned revolutionary. Rising through the Hukbalahap ranks, Felipa became the very first female Huk commander. Now unknown to many, even before the war, Kumander Dayang-Dayang actually started organizing her own guerrilla unit to prepare in the event that the Japanese invaded. And once the Japanese invaded, she led ambushes in Candaba, crippling Japanese supply lines and turning Central Luzon into a stronghold in the fight for liberation. Then there was Elena Poblete, better known as Kumander Mameng, and she was a Kapampangan fighter from Masantol, Pampanga, who led a Hukbalahap squadron against the Japanese in Minalin. Kumander Mameng didn't just fight, she actually led from the front. Under her command, Filipino guerrillas launched deadly raids on Japanese strongholds, striking hard and fast before the enemy could even react. Kumander Mameng fought on the front lines, and during an assault, she was shot in the forehead while bravely leading an attack against the Japanese. Nevertheless, her bravery inspired many in our fight for freedom. These Kapampangan women did not just fight back, they commanded, they strategized, and risked everything for our liberation. Some commanders were feared, others respected, but one Filipina was both, and she never backed down. Simeona Punsalan was a natural leader, rising to become the political director of Appellate Squadron 104. Unlike some who worked behind the scenes, Simeona Punsalan, aka Kumander Guerrero, actually led from the front. Simeona trained guerrilla warriors, planned raids, and even secured weapons from the Japanese. In fact, even Luis Taruk, the Huk Supremo, recognized her as one of the greatest and their most disciplined fighters. But when Commander Guerrero was captured in 1948, the media or the press minimized her battlefield brilliance. Instead of recognizing her leadership, newspapers called her a 6-foot Amazon, focusing on her appearance instead of her heroic contributions. But Commander Guerrero was more than just a headline. She proved that Kapampangan women were not just supporting the war, they were leading it. And while countless Kapampangan women were at the heart of the resistance, they were also fighting alongside many Filipinas from other provinces, and each of them playing a crucial role in the movement and the fight for our motherland's freedom. Winning a war is not all about combat. In fact, it is all about knowing your enemy's move before they even make them. Not every battle is fought with bullets. Some are won with deception, espionage, and sabotage. Women from Mapanique, Candaba, Pampanga risked their lives as couriers and intelligence agents, smuggling vital messages between guerrilla leaders. Female spies of the Hukbalahap embedded themselves in the towns controlled by the Japanese, secretly passing information to the resistance. And many of them were captured and tortured, but they refused to betray their comrades. Leonila Dizon was not just gathering intelligence, she was keeping the resistance alive. Leonila ran intelligence networks, coordinated raids, and ensured that critical information would reach guerrilla leaders, allowing Filipinos to strike with precision against the Japanese. Commander Cinderella took it a step further. She infiltrated Japanese command centers, stealing battle plans and orders, then passing them to the Filipino resistance. The Japanese never suspected a thing. Military or warfare intelligence is only useful if you can act deliberately and launch attacks based on them. And unknown to many, many Filipinas were actually experts in jungle warfare and tactical deception. In Panay, Coronacion Chiva, better known as Kumander Waling-Waling, was a master of jungle warfare. Kumander Waling-Waling knew how to set traps, use terrain to her advantage, and lure Japanese forces into deadly ambushes. And her specialty was decoy tactics, tricking Japanese battalions into thinking that they were only attacking a small guerrilla unit, only to be surrounded and wiped out. And then there was Aurelia Calma, aka Kumander Auring. And she didn't just fight. Kumander Auring trained farmers and ordinary civilians into soldiers, teaching them the skills to survive and win. And beyond training, she planned ambushes and raids, using guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver Japanese forces. And her leadership strengthened the resistance, proving that everyday people could also become powerful warriors. You can't really fight a war without weapons, or win a war without food or reinforcements, without supplies. And many Filipino women made sure that the guerrilla forces had everything they needed, exactly when they needed it the most. Rosa Carlos made sure guerrilla forces had exactly what they needed to keep fighting. She risked her life smuggling weapons, medical supplies, and food through heavily patrolled Japanese-controlled areas. Whether it was medicine for the wounded fighters or ammunition for an ambush, she ensured the resistance never ran out of resources. Her ability to move supplies undetected made her one of the unsung heroes of the war effort. And when supplies needed to reach the battlefield, Leonila Monteverde, aka Commander Ningning, was the one making it happen. She was a master of logistics, coordinating shipments across southern Luzon while evading Japanese forces. Through her efforts, reinforcements arrived on time. Starving guerrilla units were resupplied, and fighters never had to enter battle unprepared. Without these women, many resistance offensives would have failed before they even began. While some Filipina won battles, many were actually suffering in silence. Thousands were kidnapped, imprisoned, and tortured They were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese, and they were called comfort women. But there's nothing comforting about their suffering, and for decades, their pain was ignored until one day, a Filipina broke her silence. During World War II, thousands of Filipino women as young as 12 years old were abducted or forcibly taken from their homes. They were held in Japanese military-run comfort stations where they were brutalized and raped daily. After the war, many stayed silent, shamed, rejected, and ignored by their own communities. Until one day, Maria Rosa Luna Henson became the first Filipina comfort woman to publicly speak out. She was only 14 years old when she was taken, and after 50 years of silence, she finally told her story, not just for herself, but for the thousands of Filipino women who never got a chance. And her testimony ignited a movement for the thousands of comfort women, not just in the Philippines, but across Asia. Comfort women, that term already hides the horror and the violence. But unknown to many, the truth is even darker. Because they weren't all just women, and war does not discriminate, and neither does sexual violence. Walter Dempster Jr., better known as Markova, was one of the few recorded comfort gay victims in the Philippines. As a feminine gay Filipino, Markova was kidnapped by the Japanese and forced into sexual slavery. Markova was made to serve as a comfort woman, or as he called it, a comfort gay. Like thousands of Filipina comfort women, Markova endured imprisonment, rape, and relentless, brutal abuse. Yet, Markova's suffering remained invisible and ignored for decades. Even within the larger comfort women movement, many survivors were too ashamed or afraid to come forward. But in 2001, at 81 years old, Markova finally broke his silence. Markova's courage in sharing his story ensured that history would not erase him or others like him. Markova's testimony forced the world to confront an ugly truth, that wartime sexual slavery did not just victimize women. Many Filipino queer men suffered too, and they too deserve justice. World War II may have ended in 1945, but the battle for justice is not over. For decades, Filipino comfort women have demanded an official apology from Japan. Groups like Lila Filipina led protests, filed lawsuits, and pushed for reparations. But Japan has never fully taken responsibility. Instead, they offered humanitarian funds, refusing to call them wartime reparations. For survivors, this was a slap in the face. They didn't want charity. They wanted and deserved justice. And even today, the fight is not over. In December 2017, a Filipina comfort women statue was built in Manila. But then, in early 2018, without warning, the statue was quietly removed. The Philippine government cited roadwork as the reason, but many believe it was actually due to diplomatic pressure from Japan. And as the number of surviving comfort women grows smaller, the fight to preserve their history and memory is more urgent than ever. Because without justice, there is no closure, and without remembering history, we are doomed to repeat the same tragedies. The comfort women and queer victims of World War II fought battles no one should have endured. They survived the war, but peace never truly came. Many refused to be erased. They rebuilt, they led, and turned pain into power. The war ended in 1945, but for many Filipina guerrillas or Pinay guerrilleras, the fight continued beyond the battlefield. For Simeona Punsalan or Kumander Guerrero, the war did not stop when the fighting ended. Kumander Guerrero realized Filipina guerrilla fighters were being erased from history, and so she spent the next decades fighting for recognition and compensation for female veterans, ensuring that their sacrifices were not ignored. Because winning a war is not just about surviving, it is also about making sure history never forgets those who fought bravely for our people's freedom. You would think that after the war, these fierce Filipino women would be celebrated. Yet instead, many were forgotten. Many were erased from history books. Many were denied their benefits as veterans. Many were left out of official records. But of course, these fierce Pinay women refused to be silenced. Remedios Gomez Paraiso, aka Kumander Liwayway, never stopped fighting. Even long after the war, she became a relentless and fierce advocate for justice. for her fellow guerrilla veterans, pushing for the recognition they had long been denied. For decades, Filipina veterans and their supporters fought for a rightful place in history. They demanded recognition in official records, to be included in war memorials, and to receive the rightful benefits as veterans. Yet even today, many of their names remain missing from official war memorials, their sacrifices often overshadowed by more well-documented male-led military campaigns. But their fight was not just about being remembered. It was about setting the record straight, ensuring that future generations knew Filipina guerrilleras were not just supporting the war effort, they were leading it. And their fight did not end in 1945. It was a battle for justice, for genuine liberation, and for a world where their sacrifices would not just be remembered, but a world where the freedom they bled for would never be taken for granted. Filipina women were not just victims of war. They were warriors, spies, leaders, and even inventors. Women fiercely fighting in the jungles, cleverly smuggling intelligence, and bravely leading battles that change history. Yet their names are often left out of the history textbooks, ignored in war memorials, and their legacies and contributions almost forgotten. It is up to us to keep their legacies alive and ensure that justice is served. So if your families has stories, or if there's anything that I missed, or anything that you want to add, let us know in the comments below. Let us all learn from one another. If you want to learn more about today's topic, check out my book, The Fierce Women of Early Southeast Asia, or my friend's book, Pinay Guerrilleras, by my good friend Dr. Stacy Ann Baterina Salinas. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more history, culture, and everything in between. Maraming salamat po, o in Ilocano, agyang manak launay, in Kapampangan, dakal pong salamat kay Kongan, and in Bicolano, Diyos mabalos. See you next time, we're in Tagalog kita-kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitix, and in Binisaya, kita-ita.